Hi everyone, and welcome to the Jeff Buller Show. Today I have with me Kristin Luck. Now, Kristin sometimes hangs out in Athens in Greece, other times she hangs out in Oregon. But a little bit about Kristin before we get in and have a chat. With over 20 years experience as a serial marketing measurement technology entrepreneur, her management consulting firm, ScaleHouse, focuses on non-traditional growth strategies for data-driven marketing technology firms and market research companies. She understands firsthand the demands and distractions faced by business owners and led and consulted for many high-growth businesses in the US, Latin America, Europe, and many more. She brings a perspective to growth that transcends sales and marketing and skilled optimizing efforts and calibrating teams for growth that's both immediate and sustainable. Kristin is a founder focused on helping fellow founders and executive teams scale and monetize their businesses. And we all want to make more money, don't we? But also we want to have some joy in life along the way. So it's not all about the money, but it helps pay the bills. She is also a licensed investment banker and knows what deals look like from both sides of the table after participating in both acquisitions and exits from 30 million to 250 million. So obviously Kristin's very good at maths. So with over 20 years of experience scaling companies quickly while driving high valuations. In 2000, she founded OTX, an online research business that was named the fastest growing research firm in the world in 2002 and 2003, and was subsequently acquired by Zelnick Media and Pilot Group, and again by Ipsos in 2007. So welcome to the show, Kristin. It's an absolute joy to have you here, and I look forward to finding out how you got to where you are today and what you've learned along the way. And thank you very much for being on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So, Kristin, I had a quick look at, done some research on you, which I should do if I'm going to actually sound intelligent, and that's difficult for me sometimes, but I'll do my best. You did a PR degree originally in Oregon University, is that correct?
I did, yeah. I majored in journalism with a focus on public relations, and then I minored in exercise and movement science, which is sort of an odd mix of degrees, but
Okay.
yeah. And it's funny that you naturally assumed I was good at math, because I was saw my college roommate this last weekend, and he reminded me that we had met in a business math course, which was basically like math for dummies, because I had not tested into pre-calculus. And as it turns out, I'm just not great at theoretical math. I'm really good at statistics and math that's actually practical and makes sense, which is funny because I do financial modeling and math every day now. But I would not say that most people that knew me in high school or even university would say I was good at math.
Well, okay. I think you maybe excel at math that matters rather
Yeah,
than, okay.
absolutely.
Yeah. So because I did calculus in my last 2 years of high school as well, and I sucked at calculus, and I'm going, what am I going to use this for?
Nothing.
Nothing. Yep.
Ever. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Zero. So but I did win some mental maths competitions when I was in grade 5. So there you go. I think I came second in my class, and my dad said to me, why didn't you come first? I said, oh my God. Yeah.
I think
So
we might have the same father.
sorry, the same father, did we?
Yeah. Except for
Yeah.
mine was a spelling bee. I was really into the spelling bee. Still am.
Oh, yeah.
But it was the same sort of thing. Like there was no second place in my household. It was either first or worst.
Yeah. Well, spelling was also one of because I read a lot, I was able to spell fairly well. So, but there you go. We've got two commonalities here, maths and spelling. There you go. Or simple maths. Let's keep it that one. So now you're doing PR and you're doing dancing, right? Okay. It's maybe the same thing almost, isn't it? So in PR, you got to do a bit of dancing, really, isn't it? To make your
Yeah, I mean, exercise and movement science is more about physiology. Originally, when I went to university, I had these grand plans of being an orthopedic surgeon. So I was pre-med my first 2 years of university, and then I made it through cadaver lab. I did all the, things, organic chemistry, past that, and then I ended up doing just a 1-week internship at a hospital in the emergency room. And I think I made it halfway through the first evening and I just was like, this is not for me.
Yeah.
I have no issues with studying anatomy or physiology but the minute I see someone in pain or bleeding or just really uncomfortable, that was just more than I could tolerate. So then I switched majors. I went into marketing, as you do.
Yeah, as you do. Yeah, well, pain versus marketing may be very closely related, but so now you have moved into more investment area. So, and you're also doing a lot more analysis sort of work. What's your main focus today, and how did you get there from PR or marketing? How did you get there from PR?
I've had a very circuitous career, and I think that if you look at every role that I've had in isolation, it probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense for a lot of folks, which I think is pretty typical of what I would call like a portfolio career. So I basically stayed somewhat in the same sector, but I've moved around a lot in terms of my roles within that sector. So I've always been interested in data and analytics. I love the storytelling aspect of data, and I think that's why my journalism background has been really useful to me throughout my career, because it's not just about looking at data and for data's sake. It's about what's the story that data tells you that can be really transformational, not for a lot of businesses. And so to have that as a superpower, I think has been really fundamental to my ability to move around, to gravitate toward things that interest me. So I started out my career in a full service research company called Lieberman at the time. It's now called Material Plus. And then after that, ended up at Nielsen. I was really excited about online research and really thought online was where the whole research industry was headed. And I think one of the things that's really defined my career is that if I'm really excited about something, then I sort of gravitate naturally toward that, and I'm going to do whatever I can in order to focus on that interest. And whether that means switching jobs or starting a new company, I think letting that sort of be my North Star, like what am I really passionate? And because if you're excited about something, as you know, you're excited and you're passionate, engaged with something, you'll put in any hours that you need in order to make that dream or that vision a reality. And so I knew online research was going that way. I somehow BS'd my way into a job at Nielsen to build their first online research platform, which was a real feat, having never done online research nor having built a research platform at that point. And I ran an online division there for a couple of years before realizing that Nielsen, for all its greatness, is not a great place to run a tech startup. And so another woman that worked at Nielsen, she and I left and started OTX, which was one of the first online research businesses, and just hit the .com boom perfectly, and scaled and sold that company within 3 years. It's very very fast growth trajectory. I was in my early 30s at that time. So
yeah. So that's interesting that you mentioned that something you're really curious about, you follow that almost naturally. And that reminds me of Joseph Campbell, what he said about, he said, as humans, we actually don't have a purpose, but what we do have is following our bliss. That's where your purpose is. And following your bliss is basically following your curiosity that it is you're passionate about. So it sounds like you've been pretty true to that sort of calling.
Absolutely. And I think too, like I'm a curious person by nature and a lifelong learner. I never think that I've learned everything that there is, and there's no place for me to go. I feel like I reinvent myself kind of every 5 to 10 years. So, I started, like I said, I started out in the full service side of the business, and then I sort of gravitated to more of the tech side of the business. And then after I sold my last tech company in 2014, I had to make a decision, like I really felt like I was too young not to work anymore. I was in a pretty enviable financial position where I really didn't have to work, but I get a lot of passion and joy out of work. And so I spent some time really thinking about, if I could spend my days doing whatever I wanted, what would that be? And the intersection of also where I could make money, because I still wanted to continue working and making money. And for me, it was, could I use all of the hard knocks or lessons that I had learned myself as an entrepreneur to help other founders have the same sort of success that I had, and to also avoid a lot of the pitfalls along the way. Because as you and I have talked about previously, you look at someone's LinkedIn profile or their Wikipedia page and everything is roses and sunshine.
Yep.
They see all the late nights and all the times you cried yourself to sleep, and you ruined relationships, or all of these things that happen along a founder's journey to scaling and selling.
Yeah.
And so I can help people avoid some of those mistakes and get them to that end game faster. Like, to me, that's the most valuable, like most rewarding work that I could do. And so that's what I focused on the first couple of years of my consulting practice. And then it just sort of naturally led me to doing more pre-M&A optimization work. So helping companies really understand what are the different levers that you can pull to help maximize your valuation when you go out for sale.
Right.
And then as an extension of that, I ended up getting my investment banking license so that I can do M&A. I can do M&A in the sector that I work in. So I buy and sell companies now globally.
So is that your primary focus today? Is it more buying and selling companies globally? In other words, adding value and then helping them to be acquired? Is that your main focus today?
I would say my main focus is working with companies that are probably 12 to 36 months away from selling, and helping them sort of get over that last hurdle, to really help them understand how to position themselves for a potential sale.
Yep.
And then, ideally serve as the banker through that sale process.
Right.
Yeah.
It's something interesting that you mentioned at the beginning, in terms of you trying to see the story in the noise. In other words, what's the story behind the data? That's very interesting. So basically trying to find the signal in the noise, and what story is that telling us? What is the truth behind the data that is hidden in that noise? So, and that comes down to, I suppose, as humans, we are actually pattern recognition machines.
Yeah, absolutely.
And on top of that then but we live in a world where there is so much information and so much data that the job and our natural ability today is getting harder to recognize a pattern, because there's so much noise. So I'd be fascinated in, how do you make sense of the noise? How do you find the story in the noise? Is AI helping you with that? I'm quite curious of that, because my curiosity that's turned into a compulsion is the intersection of AI and humanity. So I'm interested in what you think about AI, and does it help you make sense of the noise, and how do you use it?
Yeah. Well, I'll start with your first question about how do you cut through the clutter. And I think a lot of it is just discernment and experience, looking at data, and also knowing what potential buyers value in companies. Also helps kind of distill down the number of data points that you need to be looking at. I think we're really fortunate now, because we live in a time, unlike when I sold my first company, we didn't have access to a lot of data about the company. I couldn't tell you how my sales and marketing team performed from a data-driven standpoint. I couldn't tell you what my average client conversion rates were. I didn't have that data available readily. And now there's so much data that we can use, not only to tune our own business growth, but also to really optimize the company when it is time to sell. And so I think having an understanding of all the different levers that you can pull to maximize evaluation is key. It's all data driven.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, before it was the data was hidden in spreadsheets that were very hard to analyze, but you can quickly, even today, there's tools that actually allow you to, measure what's the traffic of the website globally. Like they're not necessarily terribly accurate, but they give you a pretty good guide. Um, you know, then you can go and measure, like you said, conversion rates. Okay, so what's your conversion rate? Is it 2%? Is it 20%? Is it 0.02? So, and then I suppose that matters when someone says, well, I want to buy this company because their conversion rate is off the charts. Obviously got a great product. Then you get the other questions going to be asked, how can I scale this as well? So what are some of the top metrics you're looking for when you go looking for a company to work for? What's some of the key data points that you are looking for?
Yeah, it varies by the company because a services company is going to have
Yep.
different metrics or different things that you're looking for than tech companies will, just based on how they're valued. I mean, obviously like the one of the first things I look at is are they actually tracking
Yep.
and do they have an understanding of their own business performance? And you would be surprised at how many pretty large companies have literally no clue what is going on.
Yep.
I've worked with companies that were, 30 to 60 million in revenue, and we're going to sell for 4 to 5 times that, and we're working off of Excel spreadsheets internally,
Wow.
not using a CRM system. Oh my gosh, if you're listening to this and you're not using a CRM system, please get one immediately. They're magical, in terms of tracking things, but just it is interesting to me that many founders will rely on a lot of qualitative feedback or feelings that they have about things instead of really looking at the data.
Yeah.
So for instance, I've gone into engagements before where obviously you don't want to have a high percentage of customer churn. Customer churn is not a good thing. It's not good for tech companies. It's not good for services companies. Obviously, you want to retain clients for as long as you can, and you ideally want them to grow. That's the easiest way to scale. And I can't even tell you how many engagements I've gone into where I've asked someone like, well, so how are your churn rates? And like, oh yeah, clients love us. They always come back, no issues with churn, and then I'll go in and actually pull the data, and it's like, they're losing 30 to 40% of their clients year over year, or
Yep.
they don't have any kind of recurring revenue, and they're surprised by that.
Yeah.
Because they're just looking anecdotally at what is happening in the business instead of really digging down into the data.
Into the maths that matters.
Into the maths that matter. And like I said, I'm no financial whiz kid. This is all basic math.
It is, yeah.
A matter of understanding what to look for. What are the financial ratios that you need to pay attention to? What, like churn rates is just one of them. What is your average revenue per head count? How does that compare with other companies in your sector, your size? There are just so many different things that you can look at that will tell the story of your company and its ability to scale.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very interesting. And I think over the last 20 years, we've seen a rapid evolution of business, because the digital world has just changed the way we play. We can work remotely. We can build teams remotely. We can hire from Hungary or the Philippines, or we can, we've got software that manages that. We can monitor employees. I have a certain take on that, but that's another thing. But but one thing I wanted to just have a chat around, because you mentioned churn rate. So one of the things that's happened over the last 10 years especially is a lot of companies have moved into subscription models as opposed to one-off product sales. So I've been involved with a company for quite a long time, when it founded about 12 or 13 years ago, and we've moved from product one-off project sales, which has a churn rate that's measurable, and then we've moved now to a subscription model, which is an interesting area, as in it's in the creative area. So it's called creative as a service, and we're seeing all sorts of subscription models emerge. I'd be interested in what your take is on the the rise and emergence of subscription models in the business world.
Yeah, it's interesting. I love this topic actually, because I think that there was this huge push towards subscription models because services companies started seeing tech companies getting these big outsized valuations. And if you're in that sort of M&A world, a lot of what you hear, like you're working with private equity companies, a lot of you're talking to PE firms or investors, a lot of people say, oh my gosh, it has to have recurring revenue, recurring revenue, recurring revenue, you know, that's subscription revenue.
Predictable revenue.
Yeah. And I get it to a certain extent.
Yeah.
Of course, like when you're doing project-based revenue, there's more volatility in the business because you don't necessarily know when your next project is coming. Maybe you do have some syndicated projects or some longitudinal projects that are happening, but it is less predictable revenue. However, I think that there's now a lot of pushback happening on those subscription models because people are oversubscribed. When I started my first company, it was back in 2000. There, in the sector that I worked in, there were 2 or 3 platforms. That was it. That was the maximum of licenses you could have, and people licensed one platform, and that was it. Now there's a license for almost everything, and I think the subscriptions have gotten overwhelming for a lot of buyers. I've heard that Procter and Gamble hired somebody internally, literally just to get rid of subscriptions that they have internally. And so I think that we're starting to see some pushback on those subscription models. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, because I think from an investment and M&A perspective, we're looking at either recurring or reoccurring revenue. And those are 2 different things, but they're very similar in nature. So recurring revenue is subscription based. Someone signing a contract, they're signing up for a specific period of time, and they're contractually obligated to pay you for that service or that product within that period of time. Reoccurring revenue is you are getting work from the same client over and over and over and over again, but it's not because they're contractually obligated. It's because they love you. They love you. They love the service. They're loyal to it. You're doing great work for them. And because of that, you're sustaining that relationship over time. And I would say that those 2 revenue models are of equal value. If you can find a company that's got a sticky model where clients love the people there and the services, and they're coming back again and again and again, I've seen that drive equally high valuations as a subscription model, recurring revenue model.
Yeah. The subscription models, and one of the reasons I was on the board for this company for quite a while, it was that move to a subscription model to improve the potential sale,
right,
numbers. And because we're talking 10x, 20x, 30x type numbers with subscription models. So
I also think too that it's interesting, because I used to get a fair number of emails from research companies that were services based, and they would reach out and say, like, we know we have to develop a product. We have to develop a tech platform or a product, and can you help us ideate on what that would be? And which of course I would never do, because if I had a great idea for an amazing tech product, I just build it myself. I wouldn't be giving it out for free to somebody else. But at the same time, I think if you're in a services-based business, you don't always understand that once you start developing a tech platform, you're never done. You're always in development. And the sort of the internal ethos or the way that the business runs has to support that. And if you don't inherently come from that tech background and have that knowledge base and that stick-to-itiveness that has to come with that tech platform development, you're not going to be successful. And I've seen it almost bring services companies down to their knees.
Yeah, that's a very interesting comment, because and leading to that is that you used to compete with 2 or 3 companies. Now, with the rise of the web, digital, social media, everyone's can work anywhere. We are now competing globally, not with someone around the corner, even in the next city. You are competing globally, and it is just mind-boggling. And the thing about it too is that when a startup starts, it's entering 2 races. Number one is a market share race, and the other one is a tech arms race.
Mhm.
So quite often it's the one that can last the longest, that can develop the product the fastest, gets an MVP and minimal viable product in as quickly as possible, see what works, and it's just iteration after iteration, and it's tiring just watching it without even. I thought about building. I go, I know what this is going to look like. It's going to be tiring. It's going to be exhausting. But you got to go with an answer, and that's why I think a lot of tech founders today are tech people, a lot
Mhm.
of startups. Um, so
Yeah, you
it's
have to definitely have to have the intestinal fortitude for it, because it's not a light lift. And particularly now, to your point, there's so much clutter, so it's not just about having an amazing product, but it's also like, how is it really differentiated, and how are you gonna communicate that to your prospective buyers so that you can cut through that clutter. And I think a lot of times people invest so much in that platform development or that tech development, and they don't leave any money aside for, well, how am I going to actually break into the market and sell this? How am I going to, and we oftentimes underestimate too the amount of friction that we're going to get when we go out to market. We could have my last company, we had a tech product that was more robust, had more functionality, was cheaper than all of our competitors. But when we first went out to market, it was incredibly difficult to unseat the folks that were already licensing competitive platforms, because they were so deeply integrated in the operations of those companies that to rip them out was like kind of like ripping out your insides. And
Yep.
so we had to get very creative in terms of how we would transition people off of one platform and onto another, and the level of support that required and the amount of time that would require. It was really a different model than what I think we had considered when we first talked about going out to market with it.
Yeah. Well, there's a stickiness, and also the how hard it is to remove something. You only have to watch what's happened in the last week with CrowdStrike, how deep it's woven into global systems and networks.
Yeah.
And I think CrowdStrike is actually but a major security firm that is used for web hosting, such
Unless
as
you're Southwest Airlines, and then
sorry.
I said, unless you're Southwest Airlines, and then you're the only ones not impacted, I think. There was a joke that they were running off of like a Commodore 64 in a warehouse somewhere, but they actually are sort of notorious for the fact that they have not updated their technical systems for years and years, and they're the one airline that literally experienced no disruption during.
I hadn't heard that story. So,
Yeah,
so the weakness became their strength.
absolutely. Yeah,
Thank God for a Commodore 64 from the 1980s.
I
Um,
know.
yeah. So let's get back to AI. Are you using AI at all, or researching it, investigating it? I'd be interested in where you are with AI and some of your thoughts around it.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that I'm using it for investment banking purposes. I definitely have used it for sales and marketing purposes. And I have been looking quite a bit, because I am working primarily in the data and research sector. One of the things that I have been looking at pretty closely is synthetic data, which I think is super
Yeah.
interesting. So
Okay.
and which I think is controversial now for a lot of people, but which I think has some real promise, not necessarily as a means of completely replacing primary research data, but certainly in terms of augmenting it and adding more reliability and predictability to it. I think, unfortunately, the research industry for years and years and years, we've been reliant on survey data, and that means we need to interview people. But the problem is, because we've had so much downward pricing pressure on panels, so consumer panels or research respondents, what has happened is that the quality of the surveys has gone down significantly. So we don't want to incent people to take the survey anymore, and yet we still want them to take a 45-minute survey online about automotive parts, and that survey was like designed in the 1970s and then slapped up online, and someone called it an online survey. It's just, the survey's not evolved.
Yeah.
So and we're competing with every other piece of content on the internet for people's eyes and attention. And so what happens is you've got these long surveys, we're not incenting people, we're not, it's hard to keep them engaged, and yet we expect to get really great results. I think what synthetic data offers us is almost like normative databases were back in the 1990s, where if you couldn't get enough respondents in for a particular survey or for a particular study, you could actually use that database and weight data according to what the norm was. And I kind of see synthetic data as that to a certain extent, which is you can use it to amplify. If you can't get a big enough sample size, you can use it to amplify the remaining folks that you're missing. And whether that's because you just can't find those people, or maybe you're an emerging market, or you're looking for a very small defined sample set, it does allow you to provide more predictability to data that you might not be able to in other scenarios. So I think there's some promise there. I think there's a lot of buzz about it right now within the marketing world, and certainly within the market research world, and a lot of debate, and where it ends up, remains to be seen, but I'm bullish on it.
Right. Yeah, because the challenge too is with using other people's data is that it leads to little things called copyright issues. And I think there's so many copyright cases before the courts in America that it's almost overwhelming. So New York Times, amongst many others, I think News now is doing it as well. They're going, you're using our data to train your machines, so you want us to give that for free, and then you want to charge people money to use your platform. Yeah, which is one of the big challenges with even us giving our personal information to Facebook that monetizes us. Yeah. So let's
nobody blinked an eye at it.
Sorry, what?
I said that's been going on for years, and no one blinked an eye for many, many years about it.
Oh, it's been one of my ranting platform pitches, frankly. It's like, and then they use the algorithms to create hate and sell more advertising. It's like all done by neuroscience developed from gambling machines in Las Vegas. Anyway, that's another story. We're not going to go there. But I'm intrigued by, in terms of your business model, is that could you describe what that looks like, and then how do you go about acquiring opportunities and then about selling and building them up and then selling them? Can you give us a bit of an insight into a thumbnail sketch of what your business does on a day-by-day or month-by-month basis?
Sure, yeah. I know consulting is always a black box for a lot of folks. Consultancies get a lot of hate because of it. What I do on a day-to-day basis kind of varies by client, but for the most part, I'm either working on turnarounds, so helping people understand why isn't their business growing, and that again is generally you can find that in the data to a certain extent. Some of it is obviously behavioral, and that's the hardest to change. If you've studied behavioral science at all, I was fortunate because my stepmother was a lifelong behavioral researcher, like an actual academic researcher, and taught me a lot about behavioral change and how challenging it is. And I think it's the same with businesses. If you've got fundamentally unhealthy behaviors driving the business, it becomes very hard to scale it, and those can manifest themselves in lots of different ways.
Yeah.
The other types of projects I tend to work on a lot is, like I mentioned before, pre-M&A optimization, which is a lot of working with executive teams to help them understand, hey, here are all the different levers you can pull, and it might be that you don't want to pull all those levers. Like I had a conversation with a CEO late last year where I had put together recommendations, and one of the recommendations was based on how to get their revenue per head count up. And of course, if you want to drive revenue per head count, there's two different ways you can do that. You can either bring more revenue in and not hire more people, or you can continue to do the same amount of revenue and let some people go. And you often see this in companies that are heading toward an M&A event, is that all of a sudden they'll do a round of layoffs, or they'll start downsizing because they're trying to ramp up their profitability and their revenue per head count before they go into the market. And this particular CEO was really struggling with that aspect of it. And she said, I understand why it's so tempting for founders to downsize or to try to get more productivity out of their employees during that period of time. But she didn't feel good about it. And ultimately she didn't want to do it. And so there were other things that we focused on.
Okay.
Yeah. But I do think that that's a lot of the work that I'm doing is how are we using data and all of these different elements to really ultimately drive the growth of the business.
Right. So in consulting, quite often it's very time intensive and it's very hard to scale you.
It is impossible to scale me. Yeah.
So how do you scale you?
Yeah. You don't. I mean, for me, it's the work that I'm doing now is not like the work I was doing earlier on in my career. I'm not trying to build a McKinsey type consulting company and sell it. I think I've had, well, maybe not my last exit, but close to my last exit. I never started doing consulting work with the idea that I was going to scale the business and sell it because I can't be scaled. And it's very tough to even measure or bring somebody up within the consulting business because so much of it is just based on your experience of doing it, screwing it up, or having it go really well, and then learning from those mistakes. It's like the school of hard knocks. And once, I don't know about you, but like for me, I learned the best when I really muck something up. So once I've done it, once I've mucked it up once, the chances are super low that I'm ever going to do that again. And so, but I do feel oftentimes you see these really young kids going into consulting without actually ever having any experience running a business. And I think having that business experience, having gone through worked through the trenches and gone through all the ups and downs, that's where the real value lies in hiring a consultant like myself. And that's what my clients are paying for.
Right. So it sounds to me like you're a little bit choosy these days.
I am choosy, very choosy. Yeah. I mean, I have to be excited about the company, and I have to feel like there's a real opportunity for me to make an impact. I don't want to do work where I can't be impactful or where I feel that the CEO or the executive team is going to be fighting me on every recommendation. That's not fun for them, and it's not fun for me. And so getting to know a firm and also being excited about the product or service that they're selling and feeling like, hey, there's a real opportunity for them here. That's really important to me. Yeah.
Do you have a choosiness index checklist?
I wouldn't say I have a checklist. It is funny though. I did for a period of time, and I've stopped doing this now because it's always backfired on me. I would call it like a pain and suffering tax. So if it was a company
Okay.
what I wasn't that interested in, or I felt like the CEO was going to be a pain in the ass, I would just put what I thought was kind of an insane markup on it, thinking like nobody's ever going to pay me that much money to do this engagement, And every time, Jeff, every time they would come back, not even blink. They just, yep, looks great. Let's get rolling. I'm like, seriously? Like, seriously? Really? Then I was like, damn, I've got to do it.
Yeah, sometimes they're going, well, okay, I really don't like you. I'm going to double the price, and they don't blink and going, oh shit, I shouldn't have done that.
Right.
And I have, one of my filters or models is I don't work for assholes.
Yeah. I'm of that same mind. I've dealt with plenty of them in my career. I think I'm at a point where I don't have to anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's true wealth, isn't it? Where you don't actually have to work with those sort of people.
Yeah.
And you can pick and choose and follow. That's bliss, and you can follow your curiosity until it becomes a compulsion that just gets you up every morning going, oh shit, I'm just going to write about AI today. I'm going to read about it. But the reason I asked you about checklists was this, is that Charlie Munger, who we mentioned before in our little chat before we hit record, which I had trouble finding because Zoom's changed its settings. So Charlie Munger said one of his superpowers is checklists, and he has, wait for this, I don't know if, so the book I just read is Poor Charlie's Almanac, which is Poor Charlie the billionaire, as in tongue-in-cheek, poor Charlie, obviously. And he just died 3 months short of 100 last year, which was a shame. But Poor Charles Almanac, he mentions that he has 90 to 100 different mental models he uses for assessing a company for acquisition.
Mm-hmm.
So
Wow.
it's not just about the maths, it's about the psychology, because he realizes that businesses are like humans. They actually are run on different psychological models, whether it's envy, greed, pain, the list goes on. So do you use any checklists in what you do? And do you have any mental models that you just go to going to make sense of who you're looking at? In other words, your businesses you're looking at.
I mean, I do have checklists of things that I've looked for in a company, just in terms of the types of data that they're collecting and or looking at, because that gives me a pretty good read early on as to how mature the business really is, and what kind of lift is kind of in front of me from a data standpoint. I would say that I probably have more mental models around personality and the types of questions that I ask people that can be illuminating, and also to see how they're spending their money. So like one of the things that I always ask about and kind of look for is how much companies are spending on PR, which is funny because I majored in journalism with a focus on PR, but PR to me is, and I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of hate from all the PR folks out there about this, but I do think a lot of firms, PR is just it's an ego stroker. It's not, I think that there's very specific times in a company's life cycle when PR can be very useful, but that's not where most companies are on a day-to-day basis. And a lot of times I'll go into an engagement and I just see a lot of money being wasted on things that make the executive team feel good about themselves or make them, that are ego strokers. And if I see a lot of that, it's kind of a red flag that it's going to be very hard for me to move the needle there, because it's a very ego-driven company and they're not open to learning or understanding new ways of doing things.
That's very interesting. In other words, you're not using so much maths, you're using more psychological mental models to make a decision.
I am, yeah.
So we've got one mental model is the arsehole index, right? So that
yeah.
Then you've got then the other one is look at me, look at me. In other words, if it's about ego, and those people who have ego are very hard to educate and teach, aren't they?
They are. And also going back to my earlier comments about behavioral change, they're the ones least likely to change, because the minute that ego stroking stops, they feel like less of a person or that they're not getting enough attention. It's like the same reason that people spend so much money on trade shows, when trade shows are literally the worst converting marketing channel.
Exactly.
I mean, they're a total boondoggle, and now I'm going to get hate mail from all the conference organizers.
Yeah, it's like, look at the size of my stand.
Right. And I think that there are right ways and wrong ways of, I've written a conference playbook. There are right ways and wrong ways of working conferences and how you can improve your conversion rates. But at the end of the day, I think a lot of people, and this is just human nature, we go to a conference, we see 1,000 people there, and we're like, oh my God, everyone is here. No, everyone is not there. There's only 1,000 people out of a $180 billion industry are there. And that is like minutia. And the more conferences you go to, the more you see the same people over and over and over again. And the more your, sort of sales funnel gets narrower and narrower and narrower, because you've already talked to those people multiple times. So things like that are kind of, once I start looking at a company closely and like looking at their activity online and how they're talking about themselves and where they're spending their money, those are really good indicators to me of what's actually going on, and whether the company, from my perspective, is capable of pivoting, turning around, or optimizing for scale.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's and optimizing for scale is it's a big area its own right. Is how can I scale this? And that's for me. I actually didn't get into consulting because I can't scale me. I'm not going to get up at 6 a.m. to do a international Zoom call with a client.
All the time.
I'd say, yeah, I'm just going. I'm not going to do this. I'm going to do it another way because it just wasn't my gig. And quite often in digital, as with any business, it's a long game and clients want results next week.
They do. Yeah. I think that, and that's a challenge too. I always try to educate people on long game versus short game strategies, because there's both of those are part of a good strategy. But one does take more, some do take more time. Like, for instance, I was having a conversation earlier today with a prospective client about content marketing. And I think content marketing is a great example of a long game strategy.
It is a long game.
And people just give up on it way too early and say, like, oh, it's not working, Oh, I tried it. I did a post and only 2 people liked it. Okay, well, I've got news for you. Like, I've got tens of thousands of followers on LinkedIn, and sometimes I make a post and it only gets 2 likes. Have I given up on it? No, of course not. It just wasn't resonating. I use that information to improve my next post, and the next one, maybe I'll have thousands of likes. It doesn't have anything to do with me personally. It has to do with the content or who was online that day, or there's a million different factors that go into it. But I think people, they get one piece of bad feedback or one negative comment or not enough likes on something, and they're just like, oh, it's not working, I'm done with it. Or I've had clients come back to me where I've put together, like, hey, here's a 5-step plan for how we're gonna get you to that next level. And then usually at that point, I'm moving into a lighter touch engagement where I'm just checking in with them a couple times a month. I'm looking at the data and we're having a conversation about it. But I've had people come back and say, like, well, I implemented your plan and it didn't work. And I'm like, okay, well, let's unpack that from a data perspective. And it comes down to it. And it's like, okay, well, I gave you 10 things to do and you did 4 of them. And that's why it's not working, because they all work in collaboration in unison with each other.
Yeah.
So if you only cherry pick out the ones that you like, that are easy, and of course you're not going to get that same strategic lift from it.
No. Yeah. It took me a while, but I realized that as I shared content, and I'm big on content marketing, big on content marketing, when for what the term content marketing was actually created.
Well, we didn't even know it was content marketing. We were still doing it.
I just wrote what I was curious about. It was really interesting going and reflecting. And just happened to be 4 or 5 years later, I suddenly found I had tens of thousands of links and had articles linking from the New York Times, and I went, overnight success. Absolutely. Yeah. So,
yeah.
But it's for me, when I started the blog in 2009 and we're still running today and got the podcast running now, it's for me, the older I get and the less time I have, the longer the game I'm playing, which is weird, but that's the sort of way it works.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
absolutely.
Just going back to mental models, you maybe have 20 or 30 mental models already that are maybe not even written down.
Right. Yeah, for sure. For sure I do.
Because Charlie Munger mentions that many, and I've tried to find them using AI and research, and I've unearthed about 12 or 15. But I'd really like, his 2 big things were checklists and his mental models. And he says, and he uses the analogy of, well, an airline pilot, as before, he goes through these enormous checklists before taking off. And guess what? Unless you're Boeing, you don't kill many people, right?
Oh, poor Boeing.
Oh, poor Boeing.
Oh, the door might just fall off, Actually happened in Oregon.
Oh, let's use some glue and some white tape to stick the door on. Okay, right. Fine. Anyway, it's yeah, that was raised because I just watched a video about a senator inquiry skewering the CEO Boring last night. That's all. That's where that came from. But
Look at it now.
so maybe a couple last questions because I realise that you've got to go and save a few companies. Number one, what are some of the biggest lessons you've learned as an entrepreneur? You know, you've started, done 2 tech startups, sold and exited. Now you're working with other people to provide that wisdom and experience. And wisdom's very different to information. You've gained a lot of wisdom over the years by trying, failing, getting up again, and obviously succeeding as well. So what are some of the big lessons that you'd like to share with people that either want to start a business, are in a business, or want to exit a business? Because you're doing all 3 of those.
Yeah. I would say probably like one of the more important things that I learned that I try to impart on people is it's important to understand who your competition is and to be aware of what they're doing. But just be aware and then move on and do what you're going to do with your business. I feel like so many founders just get so obsessed with like, what's the competition doing, and looking at their website all the time, and what products are they building, and how much money have they raised, and it doesn't really matter at the end of the day.
Yep.
When I was building my companies, yeah, I was aware of who I was competing against, but didn't change my product roadmap. It didn't change where I was going, and it didn't change how far and fast I was outpacing them. And so I wasn't really worried if I saw them copying something I was doing, or because I knew they were still 6 months to a year behind me. I think it's good to have an awareness of your competitive set, but it's also important to be true to your vision for the company and not to get off track, or
Yep.
to get waylaid by what someone else appears to be doing, which again, all goes back to perception. Many times what things look like are not actually what is going on inside the company.
Yep.
And we just assume that, oh, well, I saw that they posted this on LinkedIn, and so I know that they're doing this and this. No, actually, you don't know. I mean, there were things that I talked about in my last company. I remember I was just using this example earlier today where mobile research was coming, and it was a big thing. Everybody was talking about it, but nobody really owned that space in terms of the conversation and content marketing. And so I was like, well, it's going to be me. I'm going to talk about mobile research and best practices and how to do it. And at that time, we couldn't even do a mobile survey on my platform. But I also knew that the research industry kind of moves at this very glacial pace, and that by the time somebody was actually willing to buy a mobile survey, I would have that capability. So I just started talking about it 8 months before I could even do it. And then, of course, our competitors thought that we were like light years ahead of where they were, but truthfully, we're probably in the same place. We just started owning that conversation in that space. So I'd say, like, don't get distracted by it. Like, it's good to be informed, but don't get distracted. Yeah,
that's very interesting because the reality is, I think because humans create businesses almost become their own species, really, and because they are a collection of humans doing stuff, and it has its own culture. So, and for me, it reminds me talking about don't keep looking at others all the time, and it comes down to who we want to be as humans, which we've talked about before, which was, I just follow my curiosity. You're very organic by the sounds of it. In other words, I do what interests me, and out of that comes abundance. So, and the thing it comes back to is interesting too for me, a reflection as we've been talking, is that as humans, we look at and aspire to be a pirate, and you wanted to be, the dragon, right?
Pete's dragon, not the dragon. I just wanted to be Pete. I wanted to ride on the dragon. That was my that's my childhood goal.
Yeah, and I want to be
those overalls that had the stripes on them, like I was a train conductor. I was into it.
Yeah, well, I wanted to be Jesse James the gunslinger because I thought they were very cool. So, but I've moved away from violence in the last few years. But I think as humans, we get to a point, if we acquire wisdom, is that when I grow up, I want to be me, not anyone else. And I think as species, and I think, and I'll put business into the species, we have multinational global companies now that are just a species that didn't exist before, and I'm talking about, you know, business species. But I think as when you're building a company, you're going, I want this business to be an extension of me. It works for me, not we work for it. And don't get distracted by everyone else around you, because you will bring your own particular uniqueness to it, just like you brought mobile research to the game. So that's what I love about being an entrepreneur. Number one, it's a creative endeavor. It's not just about making money. And if you get that core right, then the rest seems to follow, don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I would also say, you know, if I'm giving another example of like, I think an important thing to sort of keep in mind, and obviously, like we talked about, things to keep an eye on as you're scaling a business. But I would say something to think about as you consider an eventual exit, whether that's in a year or 10 years, is to plan for it. And I feel like a lot of people don't plan for that. They build this business because they love it and they want to run it, and then one day they're like, oh my God, I'm so tired of running this business, or I'm exhausted from scaling it and I don't want to do it anymore. I want to sell it. And that's a horrible place to be. You want to be very pragmatic and judicious about preparing for a business sale, and prepare for it, and to have an idea of like who would be your ideal acquirer, and how are you going to maximize your valuation, and to give yourself the time to do that. You know, I always tell people the good time to think about selling is when you've scaled it to a certain point and you still have a little fire in your belly for the business. Like maybe you don't love it as much as you did on day one, but you're not exhausted from it. Too often, what I see happen is that founders, they just run out of steam. They're tired. They don't want to do it anymore. They want to retire, and they've spent 10, 15 years in some cases building a business. And then they don't want to put in another 2 to 3 years of optimizing it, and or they don't really want to have an earnout or to have to go on with the company afterwards, which is just reality. I mean, oftentimes when you sell, there is going to be a 2 to 3 year earnout where you're transitioning the company over to the new owner. And I think a lot of folks don't realize that. And so they come in and they're like, they're already exhausted. They're kind of done with it. And now I'm like, and then I have to be the one to say like, guess what? Like, I know you want to go have boat drinks as soon as the deal closes, but you've actually got another 2 to 3 years before that happens.
Yeah. So it's not pina coladas. It's about golden handcuffs.
Yeah. 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 And I
Yeah.
think too, it's good, you know, I think it's good to have an understanding of what your ultimate goal is for the business. I think we live in this, or I guess I think it's becoming less of a thing now, but for a long time it was all about this startup hustle culture, you know, like you just gotta work, you know, and you got to sell your company. And there was a really interesting podcast I listened to one time, and I think it was on Masters of Scale. I'm pretty sure it was, but it was all about the difference between, you know, growth companies and Phoenix companies. And Phoenix companies was this idea of like Fiat, for instance, which was run for years and years by one family, and there was never an intention of selling that business when they started it. It was a family-run, family-owned business. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like, not everybody wants to scale and grow a business. Lots of folks are happy running a $2 to $3 million business. It creates a great lifestyle for them. They're never going to scale, and there's no purpose for them scaling.
Yep.
Other people go in very intentionally looking for that big exit. You know, they want to create something that scales, and they want to have a big exit. So it's just, I feel like sometimes people get pressured into that scaling, into that big exit, when it's really not inherently in their DNA, because it takes a very different type of person to scale a business than to start one.
Yep. It looks sexy from the outside.
It does. Yeah. It doesn't feel so sexy when you're doing it.
On the inside, I know. So I've got more than about 2 questions. I just want one more before we hit the big question, which I raised before we hit the go button. You must come across a lot of companies that you go into them and They want to be prepared for sale in, a year or two or three.
Mhm.
And I'm sure you must come across this all the time in that their processes either don't exist, aren't recorded, because that's what gives you freedom as an entrepreneur, is having robust processes. How many companies do you see that have crap processes, and how much time is spent in preparing them for sale is actually documenting them or putting them in place?
Yeah, I would say probably 60% of the companies that I work with
Mhm.
have poor documentation or are in a situation where they are very reliant on one or two people.
Yes.
And again, this kind of goes back to behavioral change. A lot of times that's very intentional because people have control issues or trust issues, and they want to keep things very close to the chest. And that's problematic when you want to exit.
Yeah.
And so some of it is changing those behaviors and coming up with healthier systems that are scalable within a company. And part of it is, I've got a, pretty robust list of like, hey, here's all the things that are going to come up. They're going to ask for in due diligence that you should be prepared to provide so that you can start creating all that documentation now, so that when you do go to sell, it doesn't feel like my first sale, which was like a full body cavity exam every day for
Yeah.
it was the worst. I remember getting this list and I'm like, and at that point we had to put it all in a binder. We didn't have an online data room at that point.
Yeah.
Now data rooms are online. You just upload everything. It's a lot easier. But at the time it was a binder. And I remember like sitting in this conference room at night, like I felt like my eyes were bleeding, like putting together like these documentation. I was like, oh, well, we've never used that documentation before. Why do I have to create it now? Well, I mean, I should have had it. That's the sign of a mature business. But we scaled and grew so quickly. We just never put those things in place. But now I look back and I think, yeah. And I say this to a lot of members because I'll get a lot of people that'll say like, well, I mean, I built the business to 30 million. Like, well, I don't need a CRM. And I was like, yeah, you got it to 30 million in spite of what you did, not
That's
because of what you did.
how good.
Imagine
Yeah.
what your business could be if you just done it correctly the first time,
Yeah.
like from the beginning. Like I look at my first business and I'm like, oh my God, like if I knew then what I know now, my business would have been, I mean, and it was a big business when I sold it. It would have been exponentially larger for sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah. I think it was George Lucas that said, not only do you fall in love with what you do, but the process of the doing and making of it, which is true. And for me, that really resonated. I'm going, for me, like we're in digital media production, so I actually enjoy the journey of the discovering information, putting it together, learning from that, then putting it to market, checking to see if it works, what doesn't. I actually quite like the journey. But anyway, so last question. What would you do every day if you weren't being paid for it? What would Kristin do?
I live, when I'm not in Athens, Greece, I live in Bend, Oregon, and I have 60 acres here. And if I could do whatever I wanted to do and didn't have to get paid for it, I would run an animal sanctuary. I love animals.
Okay.
I have a particular soft spot for dogs and donkeys. And yeah, I'd probably run like a dog and donkey sanctuary out here.
There's a certain ring to that dog and donkey sanctuary.
Yeah,
Have you
yeah.
have you registered that domain?
I haven't, but I'm gonna look at it as soon as we get offline here. I'm just saying, I grew up on a farm and I'm a big animal lover. I've always had a soft spot
Yeah.
for animals and animal welfare. It's been a
Okay.
passion of mine, I think, throughout my personal life. I never had kids, and so dogs have always been my children. And
Yep.
I think if I had to spend my days doing anything, that's what it would be. Yeah, I get a lot of personal pleasure out of that. Yeah.
Great. That's there you go. Now, would anyone know that from your social media profile? Maybe not, but oh,
No, I mean, if you follow me on Instagram, you'd probably see a lot of
Dogs.
dog. I had four, and now I have three. One of mine, my oldest dog, unfortunately passed away about 2 years ago. But
Yeah.
three dogs, and I'm
Yeah.
sure I'll be collecting another one in no time. I have a very hard time saying no to a rescue in need.
A
So
rescue dog. Yeah. I've heard of that. Yeah. So, Kristin, thank you very much for sharing your journey and your passion, and it shines through. And it's been an absolute blast. And what would I do if I didn't get paid for it? I'd be doing this because for me, it's about having quality conversations, quite often one-on-one, which is what I really love doing. And quite often it's a dinner party with a few friends. You end up having the most honest conversations. And apart from walking into Westminster Abbey and feeling a deep sense of joy and connection to the world, history and architecture and beauty, that brings me a lot of joy as doing this. And thank you very much for sharing your ideas and your heart and soul and mind with us today. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much.